In the last part of the series, we dealt with the heavy topic about the Whore of Babylon. That was a crucial topic to understand because it ties into so many things. The world is surrounded by the influence of the whore, and if you do not understand it, you can find yourself being drunken off her wine and fornicating with her. And this is something that we just cannot do. So that needed to be handled and discussed. But in dealing with that topic, it is important to understand her because this next subject we're about to deal with can oftentimes be confused because it is mixed in with the understanding about the Whore of Babylon and what is written in Revelation chapter 17. And so as we continue on in understanding the end times, before we get to the Battle of Armageddon, we must deal with the topic of Mystery Babylon. This topic is another topic that is surrounded by a great deal of controversy, and it is something that needs to be understood. This is such an important subject because the consequences on being on the wrong side of this information could be disastrous for yourself, your family, your congregation, etc. For many, it may be too much to bear, and they may deny the validity of it. For many others, it will be a huge eye-opener and may answer many unanswered questions they've had for a long time. I do not expect everyone to agree, because there are many different views on this subject, but this biblical topic must be discussed. Now, I personally do not believe the timing of this video is a coincidence. The fact that this topic is being discussed at the same time when this major event happening in this world is unfolding, it's very telling to me. For many years, I have stressed the importance of being set apart and not attached to the agendas. For those that live in the truth, what happened last weekend, you know has nothing to do with us, and it's just more evidence of the times that we're in. This subject is just more understanding of why it's so important to be set apart. Once you understand this subject in regards to the end times, it might help make more sense of what you're seeing play out in real time today. So again, this biblical topic must be discussed. As I explained in the last video, what I see many people do is tie in Revelation chapter 17 with Revelation chapter 18, but I do not believe this should be done. Babylon the Great is receiving judgment in both of these chapters, yes, but if you're reading objectively, these two chapters are talking about two different entities. Chapter 17 is talking of the Whore of Babylon, and this is dealing with a religious entity. Chapter 18 is dealing with Mystery Babylon and is dealing with an empire. The understanding of Mystery Babylon is very important when truly understanding how to deal with this world that we live in currently. This is a huge end times topic, and it must be discussed and broken down so you're not found to be one who is cheering for the side of an enemy that Yah has prophesied harshly against. It is time that we discuss Mystery Babylon. Let's begin. Okay, so what is Mystery Babylon? Let's discuss that first. In study, you will find that there are three Babylons. The first Babylon, which is the first empire of the world with the Sumerians, this is Nimrod's Babylon. Then there was the Empire of Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian dynasty. This is the nation who took Judah and Benjamin into captivity. And the third, there is Mystery Babylon. In order to really understand Mystery Babylon, you must go back to the first Babylon, where we see the building of the Tower of Babel, the creation of the first world government, and a one-world ruler. And then you also must understand the second Babylonian empire, the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, which Mystery Babylon is being compared to directly. In dealing with the first Babylon, like I said, this was the first empire of the world. It was based in the land of Mesopotamia and ruled by the Sumerians. This was the people that came together to challenge Yah. They built a large tower known as the Tower of Babel. They built it to challenge Yahweh and prove their greatness. This was an empire that was in pure rebellion against Yah. They came together speaking one language from which they were able to conspire against the Creator. They were under the rule of Nimrod, who was the leader of this world government. And at this time, after the flood, they were the inhabitants of the world, and they came together in order to challenge the dominion of the Creator. The book of Jasher, chapter 9 says, "And King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control, and all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and his great men took counsel together. They said to each other, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that we may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars.' And they all went before the king, and they told the king these words. And the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all the families assembled, consisting of about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk. And they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin, and they began to build it. And whilst they were building against Yahuwah, Elohim of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And all these people and all the families divided themselves in 3 parts. The first said, "We will ascend into heaven and fight against him." The second said, "We will ascend to heaven and place our own gods there and serve them." And the third part said, "We will ascend to heaven and smite him with bows and spears." And Elohim knew all their works and all their evil thoughts, and he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower. And on account of its height, the mortar and bricks did not reach the builders in their ascent to it, until those who went up had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and the bricks. Thus was it done daily. And behold, these ascended and others descended the whole day. And if a brick should fall from their hands and get broken, they would all weep over it. And if a man fell and died, none of them would look at him. And Yahuwah knew their thoughts. And it came to pass when they were building, they cast arrows towards the heavens, and all the arrows fell upon them filled with blood. And when they saw them, they said to each other, "Surely we have slain all those that are in heaven." For this was from Yahuwah in order to cause them to err, and in order to destroy them from off the face of the ground. And they built the tower and the city, and they did this thing daily until many days and years were elapsed. And Elohim said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, "Come, let us descend and confuse their tongues, and that one man should not understand the language of his neighbor." And they did so unto them. And from that day following, they forgot each man his neighbor's tongue, and they could not understand to speak in one tongue. And when the builder took from the hands of his neighbor lime or stone, which he did not order, the builder would cast it away and throw it upon his neighbor, that he would die. And they did so many days, and they killed many of them in this manner. And those who were left amongst them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building, and they also became scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called that place Babel. For there Yahuwah confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And this is the story of the first Babylon, a world empire that sought to come together to challenge our Creator. And from this empire we have the pagan gods that the later world will come to worship. The father god Nimrod, who is the sun god, the mother goddess Semiramis, who is the moon goddess, and the son of God, Tammuz, who is the sun god reborn. It's important to understand the first Babylon, because if you do not, then you will never understand the prophecy of the Babylon that was said to come. Mystery Babylon is spoken about in great detail by the prophet Jeremiah in chapters 50 and 51. When reading those chapters, he interchanges often with the current Babylon of his day, that's the Babylon that took Judah captive, and then interchanges with the Babylon the Great, the Mystery Babylon to come. You can see that because many of the characteristics that he speaks does not fall in with the Babylonian Empire of his day. Also, the prophet Isaiah speaks on Mystery Babylon in chapter 47 as well. And the apostle John speaks of it in Revelation chapter 18. Mystery Babylon is the third Babylon to come. Yahuwah is very angry with Mystery Babylon and says very specific things of judgment against Babylon. Now, the main foundation of Babylon is world dominance. This is what is in her heart. Babylon wants to dominate and control. And that is why understanding the first Babylon is so important, because that's the culture. Nimrod's Babylon was the foundation. But as I've explained in part 10, what happened at this Babel is more of a goal for the world. They want to repeat this for the world. As we read about Mystery Babylon, I think what gets lost is that when John was writing about Mystery Babylon, the influence he had was not the first Babylon from Nimrod, but the second Babylon that not just 5 or 6 centuries before carried his ancestors off into captivity. Mystery Babylon is in comparison to Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. And so now that you know the foundation of Babel from the first Babylon, it is important to understand the second Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. So again, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon is the one who took the people of Judah into captivity. Now we do have biblical accounts of Babylon, but it's important to go through some history about this empire, because for John to call this future nation Babylon, in order to understand it, it must be held up in comparison to Babylon. And for what I have seen is that when people want to say that this place is Mystery Babylon or that is Mystery Babylon, they do not go over much history of the Babylonian Empire in order to really understand what to compare it to. They're not really comparing it to Babylon. They're just saying this is evil, this is wicked, and this is what it should be. You cannot call something Mystery Babylon without understanding what to compare it to. And let's also be clear, because I know people love playing devil's advocate and say, Mystery Babylon is not written in the scriptures. So let me explain this. The reason why we call it Mystery Babylon is because of John. In Revelation chapter 18, John is speaking about a future Babylon. He says, Babylon the Great is fallen. And listen, it should be clearly known that by the time he was writing this, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon had already been conquered by the Persians long before. There was no Babylon at that time. So in order for Babylon the Great to fall, as John prophesies, there must be a future Babylon to come. And being that we don't know what this Babylon is from when he wrote this is why it is a mystery. Hence why we say Mystery Babylon. So just in case people say, where do you get Mystery Babylon from? This is why. You only expose your lack of understanding when you try to play games like that, saying Mystery Babylon isn't spoken in the scriptures. Anyways, back to what I was saying. So being that we went over the first Babylon and understand the foundation of what Babylon is, let's discuss the second. So if you're to do your own research, in history today, they call this Babylonian Empire the Neo-Babylonian dynasty. This empire rose in the 6th century BC to become the wealthiest and largest city of its day. Under the rule of a few long-lived kings, its name became synonymous with opulence, high finance, and scientific knowledge. Now, my studies on this subject are from many different sources, but for this video, I will be using the information from the book, The Middle East, The Cradle of Civilization, by Dr. Stephen Burke. Let's go over the history of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty that flourished from 626 to 539 BC. Not even a full century. It held sway and control over an empire that was relatively peaceful and prosperous, but shorter lived and more geographically compact than the preceding Neo-Assyrian Empire before it. Remember, Israel, the northern 10 tribes, were conquered by the Assyrian Empire about a century before Judah was taken over by Babylon. King Nabopolassar, who reigned 626 to 605 BC, is given the credit for taking control over the then conquered and divided Assyrian Empire. He consolidated his political control over other Babylonian cities like Nippur and Uruk. He then methodically reduced the power and role of the Assyrian Empire by taking credit for the Median capture of Assur in 614 BC, destroying Nineveh in 612 BC, and crushing the Assyrian garrison at Haran in 609 BC. And after he had victory over the Egyptian forces at Carchemish in 605 BC, Babylon was confirmed as the dominant empire. Babylon then controlled many of the lands only recently ruled by Assyria. This included Syria, the Levant, and the Phoenician cities. Understand that Judea is included in that area. King Nabopolassar's son, the crown prince, Nebuchadnezzar II, ascended to the throne in 605 BC and reigned until 562 BC. Nebuchadnezzar means the god Nabu guards the air. He ruled the districts of the Babylonian heartland through a network of appointed city governors, tribal chieftains, and temple estates. He had his own government. Babylonians were content to continue many Assyrian policies, including rule through the local power structures, mass deportations, and the installation of puppet kings and governors in key cities. We know of such puppet kings as Nebuchadnezzar did so in Judah, like we know of with King Zedekiah of Judah. Babylon had prominence in long-distance trade. The city of Babylon directly controlled ends that were along major trade routes, where merchants could rest. And they had ports as far as present-day Medina, the Persian Gulf, and the border of Egypt. This was very far-reaching during this period in time. Exotic goods arrived on a regular basis from places in Africa, South Asia, Greece, and the Baltic Sea. It was the center for world trade and high finance. And this was reflected in Nebuchadnezzar's building initiatives, which took it to even further heights. The rebuilding of the famous ziggurat of Babylon, which became known as the Tower of Babel as we know it. You see, what we know of the Tower of Babel today is modeled after this building of ziggurat from Nebuchadnezzar. We don't actually know what the true Tower of Babel actually looked like. They just imagine it based off of what Nebuchadnezzar built. But Babylon was grandiose. They rebuilt the main temple of Marduk, and the main gate of the city was called Ishtar Gate. Marduk was the main god of this era and was mostly called Baal, or the Lord. In understanding Babylon, it can help by understanding it through the eyes of those not native to Babylon. So we can look at the Yahudim. In Solomon Grazel's book, History of the Jews, he gives more details about the Yahudim's life in Babylon. He explained, the Babylonians were cruel conquerors. They executed the leaders of the people that they conquered. They sometimes kept men in prison for many long years, but they were not cruel masters, and we see that clearly in the book of Daniel. The majority of the people whom they drove into exile were permitted to live and work under certain conditions. Now, they definitely were not able to return back to their own land, and they were looked down upon in society as a conquered people. The conquered people now in Babylon were sometimes assigned land which they could work until if they paid heavy taxes. Sometimes they were permitted to settle in cities and earn their living from trade or their own manual labor. The exiles over time adjusted themselves to the new conditions. Babylon was the current world empire who had control over most of the known world, and being a prosperous country, those who adapted could find some sort of prosperity. So for the Yahudim, who once lived under promises of greatness, there was now a change. Each of the exiles could have a personal future in Babylonia, but as a whole, the future of the Yahudim seemed to be without hope, because they were no longer a nation. For instance, Daniel held stature in Babylon and was able to establish himself there, but this meant very little in regards to the future of his people as a whole. The kingdom of Babylonia was definitely different in contrast to Judea, the land where the Yahudim came from. And the city of Babylon itself was definitely different from Jerusalem. Babylon was huge, big, huge walls, towering domes of its temples, massive palaces. Jerusalem could be compared as a small town compared to Babylon. They were now seeing in front of them people performing sacrifices in Babylon's temple to Marduk, or Ishtar, the chief gods of Babylon. In the city were mistresses from all over the known world, men from every nation. Many different people all in one nation could be seen. It's a melting pot, if you will, a land that consisted of many different nations. This empire is where the exiles of the Yahudim walked, and they were influenced by. As time of their exile went on, their personal life did become easier, but they began to believe that there was no use of struggling against anything as powerful as Babylon because Yah had forgotten them. They began to become assimilated into Babylon. The way of Babylon was all about bringing people into their way. They changed their names. They changed how they ate, how they worshipped. We see many examples of this in Daniel. In Babylon, Daniel's name wasn't the Hebrew Daniel, it was Belteshazzar. And that's how it's shown in the King James Version. But that does not help you really understand what they're really doing with that name. The name was Belteshazzar, because they incorporated the name of their gods in their name. Their chief god was Baal. It's very much how they do in language. It's why Yah is incorporated in many of the Hebrews' names. Jeremiah or Yirmiyahu, Isaiah or Yeshayahu, Zechariah or Zechariah, Matthew or Metayahu. Yah is incorporated in their names for respect, admiration, and honor. Their names have meanings. So a name like Zechariah or Zechariah actually means Yahuwah remembers. He is incorporated in their lives. So when I hear people speak against the name Yah, they just don't really understand the culture. But understand, this was not just something that the Hebrews did. The other nations did this as well. Babylon honored their god Baal in their names, which is why we see these different names like the name of Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar. So this influence is quite common. Greeks also incorporated this. Their god Zeus was incorporated in many of their names. Dionysus, Bacchus, Icarus, Olympus, Prometheus, Uranus, which is one main reason why I do not use the Greek transliteration of our Messiah's name, Jesus. I just want to point out this practice. In regards to Babylon, they were assimilating those that they conquered into Babylonia. This was the way of Babylon as we see early in Daniel. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Yasharel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. The Chaldeans are the same thing as the Babylonians. The Yahudim were assimilated into Babylon, and while they were learning about their new life in exile, they had no hope about being who they were before. So in that part of the history is where the prophets came into the picture. Prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah went from being prophets of doom to prophets of hope as they prophesied what Yah placed upon them. Babylon had different classes in their society. It's important to note that because they took in so many slaves, they had a melting pot of nations within their borders. And before the Greeks started with Hellenization, they also were about attaching these slaves, these new people, into their country. They wanted to attach these people to their culture, teaching their captives what it meant to be a Babylonian. Even before the rise of the empire, the private and temple libraries of Babylonia were already famous for the literary and scientific texts they had produced and preserved. Ritual and theological tablets were shelved next to medical, mathematical, and magic texts. Babylon had become famous for astronomical sciences. From the history of night sky observations and the reading of omens and the movement of the stars, they were known for their expertise in astrology. They created the first sundial. This was a device for telling time using the sun. You see, Babylon was the epicenter of the world during its time, and it was known for its luxuries, high finance and trade, its sorcery and religious worship of the gods, and their luxuries. They were a melting pot of nations that tried to indoctrinate their people into their way of life, a custom that the Greeks later took the helm on. Before the Greek and Roman empires, Babylon was the example to the world of power, and because their history goes all the way back to Nimrod and paganism, they were well known of. But a point I don't think that should be missed is that the Greek and Roman empires were also in influence since the period that John prophesied of Mystery Babylon. So the question is that you want to ask yourself is, why was it Mystery Babylon and not Mystery Greece or Mystery Rome? Well, now that we understand more about Babylon, the first and the second, let's now read what John prophesied about Mystery Babylon, and then we can discuss the answer to that question. Revelation chapter 18. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to heaven, and Elohim has remembered her iniquities. Render to her justice as she has rendered to you, and repay her double according to her works. In the cup which she has mixed, mix double for her. In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure giving her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow, and will not see sorrow. Therefore her plagues will come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be utterly burned with fire. For strong is Yahuwah Elohim who judges her. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city. For in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise any more. Merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, every kind of citron wood, every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon and incense, fragrant oil and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and bodies and souls of men. The fruit that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all things which are rich and splendid have gone from you, and you shall find them no more at all. The merchants of these things who became rich by her will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What is like this great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the seas became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for Elohim has avenged you on her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence the great city Babylon shall be thrown down and shall not be found any more. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters shall not be heard in you any more. No craftsman of any craft shall be found in you any more, and the sound of a millstone shall not be heard in you any more. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all nations were deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all who were slain on the earth. That's Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 through 24. That's a lot. So now that you have been given the history of Babylon from its beginning with Nimrod to Neo-Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar ruled, and now you have seen what was prophesied by John in Revelation 18, we will now discuss what has been prophesied, because it was not only Revelation 18 that speaks on this. Like I said earlier, when speaking of this subject, I run into many people that like to say that the Roman Catholic Church is Mystery Babylon, or that modern-day Iraq is the place of Mystery Babylon. Or now, more recently, people are saying that Mystery Babylon is Jerusalem. But I wholeheartedly disagree with those views, because these places do not fully align with all of the characteristics of Mystery Babylon. So before I explain what nation I believe Mystery Babylon is, and I'm sure most of you already know, I will go over the characteristics found in Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, Isaiah chapter 47, and Revelation chapter 18. You do not need to write them all down. I have listed them on my website for your own review. The link is in the description box. Okay, so here are the characteristics of Mystery Babylon. Let's go through them. Mystery Babylon is a nation, not a system. This is according to Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 12, which says, Your mother shall be deeply ashamed. She who bore you shall be ashamed. Behold, the least of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. So clearly we see this is a nation, the least of the nations. The King James actually says hindermost, which is another word for last. This scripture tells us a few things actually. From the scripture we see it's a nation, it's not a system. But also we see that it's the last of the nations. Of all the other great empires of the world, Rome, Greece, Britain, this end times nation, which we will see will be very strong, is also the youngest. In this scripture, we also see that Mystery Babylon also has a mother who bore her, and that this mother will be ashamed of it. These are all characteristics. So, listing it out, Mystery Babylon is a nation, not a system. It is the youngest, it has a mother who bore it, and its mother will be ashamed. Another characteristic is that Mystery Babylon will be the hammer of the whole earth. Verse 23 of chapter 50 says, How the hammer of the whole earth has been cut apart and broken, how Babylon has become a desolation among the nations. Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 23. Next thing, Mystery Babylon is the land of carved images. Also, they are insane with their idols. Verse 38 of chapter 50 says, "A drought is against her waters, and they will be dried up. For it is the land of carved images, and they are insane with their idols." Continuing in chapter 51 of Jeremiah, it tells us that there are people who live in Babylon that originate from other countries. Verse 9 of this chapter says, "We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go everyone to his own country. For her judgment reaches to heaven and is lifted up to the skies." Next, we also learn that Mystery Babylon is located around many waters and is abundant with many treasures. Verse 13 says, "O you who dwell by many waters, abundant in treasures, your end has come, the measure of your covetousness." Next, verse 53 says that Babylon has tried to get up to heaven. "Though Babylon were to mount up to heaven, and though she were to fortify the height of her strength, yet from me plunderers will come to her, says Yahuwah." That's Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 53. And let's also make this clear, because people may want to say that these characteristics are not speaking about Mystery Babylon, but about Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. There are always many that can't see prophetic writing. If you want to raise that argument, okay. It still does not matter though, because this is still all about Babylon. The Babylon to come should match the Babylon of the past, should it not? That's why it's Mystery Babylon. The characteristics of Mystery Babylon should match with the characteristics of the old Babylon, or else he wouldn't have called it Babylon. If you're not looking at what is written about Babylon in the Word in order to understand what to compare the Babylon to come to, you are literally just making things up. Let's keep going with the characteristics. We also learn that the other nations in the world are drunk off her wine of fornication. They are deeply influenced by her. We see this both in Jeremiah 51 verse 7 and in Revelation chapter 18 verse 3. Babylon was a golden cup in Yahweh's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine. Therefore the nations are deranged. That's Jeremiah 51 verse 7. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Revelation chapter 18 verse 3. You see, basically, all the nations of the earth are learning to sin against our Creator through the abominations taught from Mystery Babylon. The book of Isaiah chapter 47 says that Mystery Babylon will be called the Lady of the Kingdoms. "Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms." Isaiah 47 verse 5. Verse 9 of Isaiah 47 tells us there's a lot of sorcery and enchantments going on in Mystery Babylon. "But these two things shall come to you in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon you in their fullness, because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments." Isaiah 47 verse 9. Prophesy the same way as Revelation 18 does. Revelation chapter 18 is a chapter dedicated to Mystery Babylon. So as we're still dealing with the characteristics, Mystery Babylon is a dwelling place of demons. It is a prison for every foul spirit. It is a cage for every unclean and hated bird. Verse 2 of Revelation chapter 18 says, "And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird." When we read verse 3 earlier, it also says that the businessmen of the earth become rich because of Babylon's abundance of luxury. Verse 7 tells us that Mystery Babylon glorified herself and lived in luxury. It says, "In the measure that she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, in the same measure give her torment and sorrow. For she says in her heart, I sit as queen and am no widow. It will not see sorrow." Also, other kings and rulers of the earth will become rich and live luxuriously because of her. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. That's Revelation chapter 18 verse 9. Next, Babylon will have a great city that allowed others to become rich because of her wealth. They drew the dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, "Alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she is made desolate." Revelation chapter 18, verse 19. Also, Babylon's businessmen were the great men of the earth, and by its sorcery all the nations were deceived. The light of the lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all nations were deceived. Revelation chapter 18, verse 23. And these are some of the characteristics that we see in these chapters when referencing Mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great. Again, I have left the link to these characteristics in the description box so you can review this on your own. So let's put this all together. Without me telling you my obvious view, when reviewing all these characteristics yourself, then reviewing the world that we're in right now, the geopolitical structure, the money structure, the social structure, the country with the most influence, what nation on earth today aligns the most with all these characteristics? Remember, we are speaking of a nation, not a system. It is the youngest. It has a mother who bore it and will be ashamed. It is the hammer of the whole earth. It is the land of carved images, and they are insane with their idols. There are people who live in Babylon that originate from other countries. It is located around many waters, and it is abundant with many treasures. It has tried to get up to heaven. All the other nations in the world are drunk off her wine of fornication. They are deeply influenced by her. It would be called Lady of the Kingdoms. There is a lot of sorcery and enchantments going on there. It is a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every foul spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. The businessmen of the earth become rich because of her abundance of luxury. This nation glorified herself and lived in luxury. Other kings and rulers of the earth will become rich and live luxuriously because of her. It will have a great city that allow others to become rich because of her wealth. Its businessmen were the great men of the earth, and by its sorcery all the nations were deceived. To you, what nation during these last days does this Mystery Babylon align with the most? You see, for me, a long time when I studied this, it was amazing how much the United States fits with this prophecy. The United States, the youngest of all the empires, a nation that was born from England, who is its mother. A nation that literally is the hammer of the earth. I mean, look, in these modern times, it is referred to as the world's policeman. It's full of carved images, and the population is obsessed with its idols and idolatry. Located around many waters, it is a country that many people live here, but they do not originate from. It has tried to get up to heaven. And though I do not believe in the lie of outer space and that they landed on the moon, they have built rockets attempting to reach heaven and get through the firmament. What other nation is known as Lady Liberty, the leader of the free world? You know, this country stopped producing things long ago. But still, what is one of the biggest exports of America? Its culture. The music, the television, the movies, the values are all exported to the rest of the world. No other place on earth can change the values and belief of a person more than the United States. A person can come from another country, come to the United States, and totally lose their values, totally change. The rest of the world is drunk off its wine. I mean, what other nation on earth has made more people rich than the United States? And is New York City not the financial capital of the earth? What do you think this whole great city is about, building these skyscrapers? They were a model of building Tower of Babels all over the city. This is what they do. This is a very big topic to really grasp and understand. And it gets even deeper when you truly look under the hood and what the true reason for the creation of this country was. It was a nation used to challenge and rebel against the Creator. It was a nation that used its financial, military, political, religious, and social influences to create its own modern-day version of the Tower of Babel. This land of the free actually represents the land of the free to sin. There is literally no other nation in history or in the future that can match all that has been said about Mystery Babylon like America does. No other nation. People like to say Iraq or Rome, or now people are saying Jerusalem. But they are looking at one scripture when the multitude of scriptures don't match. Most people don't even use Jeremiah or Isaiah in their analysis. And they definitely don't try to compare it to the actual Babylon, why it's called Mystery Babylon. And do you remember when I asked, why didn't John say Mystery Greece or Mystery Rome? But he said Mystery Babylon? What did Babylon do? It took captives of Judah as slaves and forced them to work and establish themselves in their land. And it began to teach these Yahudim captives how to assimilate and be Babylonians. What was the United States built off of? This nation also took captive the Yahudim and forced them to work and establish themselves in the land and made them assimilate into Babylonians. People don't really realize how much history has repeated itself. This is why he said Mystery Babylon and not Mystery Greece or Mystery Rome. Everything that's happened in this world is spiritual if you open up your eyes and look at it through spiritual lens. This is an understanding that as believers we should be fully aware of. We should make sure we are not attaching our hearts to something that is completely against our Creator. There's nothing we can do about this. Understanding this is not about taking physical action. You cannot reverse this. It was prophesied and foretold of. The importance of understanding this is so that once you understand where this nation fits in prophetically, it helps you understand more about its future. It helps you understand that you should not be aligned to it. There are many warnings that are given to us, and we are told of many prophetic things, many judgments that will come upon Mystery Babylon. We're told about these things because this is not our battle to fight. The reason we must understand this is so that we are not deceived by her and not aligned to something that is against our Creator because we are born into certain indoctrinations. The first thing that they do when they get us into their school system is have us stand up, put our hands across our heart, and pledge allegiance to it. We have been indoctrinated into Babylon. And it's important that you make sure that if you are a believer and you are focusing on Yah's kingdom, you come out of her. We see many warnings on how we should deal with Mystery Babylon. One specifically that I live with continuously is Revelation chapter 18 verse 4, which says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins and lest you receive of her plagues.'" When I first read this, I said to my wife, we gotta get out of here. It's time to go. But at that time, we had very little money and had no clue where we would have gone. And I had no direction yet on how coming out of Babylon would have been possible for myself and my family. I realized at that time I was acting through fear and not guidance from our Father. Obviously, if we're able to, and Yah is leading us directly, we should come out of her physically. But that is not possible for the masses. Does that mean that we're doomed and destined to be part of her judgments? The answer is a clear no. As this understanding is unveiled to you, it's not a reason for panic. I have no business with the fate of Babylon. It has nothing to do with Yah's people, those that are truly his. I take that message of come out of her, my people, very much like I take the message of not being of this world. You see, we could leave the United States physically, but if we are still drunk off its wine of fornication, we would still be living through her influence. Come out of her, my people, is removing yourself from all of her mindsets, her influences, and her ways. These are reasons why I prefer to use the Hebrew names of our Savior and Creator rather than through the Babylonian tongue. Why do you think English is the language that is taught all over the world? It's literally a redo of the first Babylon. I know the question I would hear from this discussion is, should you move? As I said in the second Exodus video, only move if it is Yah clearly directing it. For many of us, it is Yah that brought us here. He brought our family, our ancestors here. And therefore, it will be Him who brings us out of it. He didn't prophesy that He would bring us here and then we would have to take it upon ourselves to figure out how to leave and where to go. So trust in Him only and do not live by fear or provocation. The most important thing is to come out of her mentality, her ways. Do not live through her influences and how she fornicates. Stay away from her idols. Do not worship Yahuwah the way it has influenced you. Do not be like her. Do not live in rebellion. Do not live in sin. Do not accept sin. Do not have tolerance of sin. Everything they preach is tolerance of this and tolerance of that. You must live in intolerance. You cannot accept all this wickedness. You cannot have a do what thou wilt mentality. You cannot say, oh, to each his own. All these thoughts are ways of Babylon. Beware of its churches and religious institutions. Beware of its culture and its social influence. Align your life more with the word than with Mystery Babylon. And this is where you find your strength and your protection. Now, in regards to the end times, this is it. This is an end times nation that leads the world into sorcery and rebellion. And if you just open your eyes to this world, this influence should be easy to see around the world. There is a reason why the movies from the United States and the music stars from the United States have influence all over the world. I mean, look at what they did with Michael Jackson, or even more recently, Taylor Swift. The influence of Mystery Babylon is all over the world, getting the nations drunk off its wine and rebellion. In order to understand the end times, understanding Mystery Babylon must be a part of your knowledge and your awareness. You must not be a Babylonian. Now, what happens to Mystery Babylon? Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come, and the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no one buys their merchandise any more. For in 1 hour such great riches came to nothing. Every shipmaster, all who travel by ship, sailors, and as many as trade on the sea, stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, "What is like this great city?" They threw dust on their heads and cried out, weeping and wailing, and saying, "Alas, alas, that great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by her wealth. For in 1 hour she is made desolate. The light of a lamp shall not shine in you any more, and the voice of bridegroom and bride shall not be heard in you any more. For your merchants were the great men of the earth, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived." That's Revelation 18. So what happens to Mystery Babylon? She is dealt out judgment. I do not know the timing of this. It is not clear when this happens according to what is prophesied in the book of Revelation, so I cannot say I have an expectation on when this all happens. I believe that Israel will be gathered long before this occurs, and also many of the saints who need testing, those who did not come with us when they were gathered, unfortunately will be persecuted here for their beliefs. This is why it's important to live in the truth now. Once we leave, we will never see this place again. I don't claim to have an idea of when. I just know it will be judged. I don't focus on these things in my worldview. What I do focus on is not being tied to Babylon and being drunk off her wine. I do not want my ways and my influence to have anything to do with Babylon, so I have been in a constant retraining of my mind and my values to be more attached to the culture of the Hebrews, less to Babylon's, and that is my process. I am not raising my children to be Babylonians. This is a process I believe we all should engage in, and it can be different for all of us depending on what really influenced us and how deep we are entrenched. But once you are liberated, you no longer are attached to the garbage and the mind games. You will come to see that this is all they had over us, a mental attachment that keeps us in bondage. Once you wake up and liberate yourself from Babylon, you can become more kingdom-minded and wait for Yah to free us like he did when he used Cyrus of Persia. We do not know exactly what he's going to do, but we trust in him that he keeps his promises. And it's important that you understand this is not only about the natural branches of Israel. All of us, for the most part in this country, did not come here because we ourselves made the choice. We were born into a major spiritual movement that was not viewed in that way. Once you are set free from it, you can detach from a Babylonian mindset and become more kingdom-minded. The hardest thing to deal with is understand that you have been programmed to be allegiant to a system that is against Yah. You will find that the problem that you have with ministering and helping people come into the kingdom is because of their attachment to Babylon. People are just highly influenced, and it could be you as well. Once you know how to break free, you can help others do the same. Again, it is mental more than anything. Just because you leave Babylon physically does not mean you have left mentally and spiritually. You can go all around the world and see her influence everywhere. The world is drunk off her wine. So it's more than a physical shift, but it's absolutely more mental. And if you understand this, you can successfully detach and come out of her. You see, I realize that this is a message that may be hard for many to accept. So many people are rooting for the politics of this country. There are people that will be completely against this message, like the people I call WCRs, white Christian Republicans, the Patriots. They're so tied to this system, and they're focused on Trump. They believe Trump was sent to save the country. It's hard for them to really come to grasp with reality. Or the Hebrew descendants who are now assimilated Babylonians. They believe in politics, believe in Biden is truly a man working for the people, and they're focusing on their civil rights and Black Lives Matter and all this other nonsense. Going to church, learning how to be wealthy and all this other stuff. If people understood spiritually what this nation represents, they would not be expecting the Most High to be supporting Mystery Babylon and blessing it. This understanding concretely allows us to know exactly why we should not be participating and believing in the politics and the cultures of this land. People believing in the civil rights movement or the Black Lives Matter movements that will bring equality. That's garbage. You're mind controlled. Pastors preaching a prosperity doctrine that teaches their flock to attain as much of Babylon as possible. You live in deception. People believing and trusting in this Babylonian-based nation while claiming a belief in the one true God, Yahuwah. You will hear, I never knew you. From the inception of this country, it was influenced by Freemasonry and the occult. The country was built off the back of Hebrew slaves, and the first president of the United States was a Freemason.
Mrs. Adams? Boy. Get these up the stair. And you. Come on, get to it.
Half-fed slaves building our nation's capital. What possible good can come from such a place?
You know, many of us are doing the work right now to confront an uncomfortable past in this country and in our cities. So that brings us to this next question. Just how many buildings and monuments in Washington, D.C. were built by enslaved people? We talked to some local historians to try and find an answer.
We know for a fact that enslaved Africans were used in the construction of the U.S. Capitol and the White House. We know that for a fact because inside the National Archives and inside the collections of the White House Historical Society and the U.S. Capitol Society, we have the receipts where slave owners were paid for the rental of their slaves to build those two buildings.
What possible good can come from such a place?
Yes, the foundation of this country was built by Hebrew slaves. And the ceremony of the induction of this country, it was all Masonic. It was a complete Masonic ceremony. That was the founding that everyone just recently celebrated on July 4th. This is how this country began. Look at all the buildings of Washington, D.C. In fact, they built Washington, D.C. into a Masonic symbol. This is a land of sorcery. It's a little too much to go into in this type of video, and honestly, you don't need to. This is just something that should help us clean up our hearts and what we are attached to. There are many right now so attached to Babylon that this whole agenda with Trump is tying them into it one way or the other. If you recognize the truth, then it can set you free from all of it so you do not have to share its fate. There have been many different symbolic things that have happened that have depicted this. I mean, do you remember what happened to Wendy Williams when she put on that Statue of Liberty suit?
Contest, we do it every year. It's always a lot of fun. Let's get started. Our first caress.
Babylon the Great is falling and it will fall. And we are watching the narrative of it in real time. And if you're so mentally and spiritually attached to it, you will not see it until the hour of judgment starts. What happened with Trump recently should be a real test for each of us to know how attached to it we are. If you found yourself attached to this agenda, you are attached to Babylon. We are warned continuously about this end-time nation of Mystery Babylon, but many of us either have not been exposed to this truth or we refuse to accept it. In the end, that's your choice. Look at the values of this country and ask yourself, does it align with the Bible, or is it completely moving in a direction of rebellion against it? It's your choice what you choose. Ask yourself, on the back of the dollar bill when it says, "In God we trust," what God are they referring to? When you're thinking about that, maybe you'll understand more on why the Eye of Horus is on the back of the bills. We are in the last days. We are not trying to change the world or even to save it. We are saving souls and preparing them for the kingdom of Yah. We are breaking bondage and deception and living boldly in these last days. Please, do not take my word for anything. Please go study on your own. But in the end, as Father opens your eyes and unveils more truth, please walk in conviction and live through these words. Come out of her, my people. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay. Thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share this video with others. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Yah willing, I upload every Friday. Also, please don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on my website, truthunedited.com. As always, I would like to give a special thank you to those who have donated and contribute to this ministry. Your contribution and support are a huge blessing to this ministry. Thank you for your obedience to Yah's call on your heart. I'm humbled by your support and I'm very thankful for you. Be blessed. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. I love you all.